Dr. Wilde, we're ready to resume. Can you hear and see me?
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Thank you.
So just a handful of further questions, Dr. Wilde. In your witness statement, you were asked about what might have been recorded on death certificates where patients of the centre had died in consequence of HIV or HCV. And you said that you have a vague recollection in the early years of your appointment, due to the stigma of viral infections and to protect the dignity of the individual and the wishes of the family, you didn't specifically mention HIV and HCV infections on death certificates, although you thought that for HIV infection you would probably have used a term such as retroviral disease. Is that right, first of all?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you know at what point approximately that would have changed, so that the specific viruses giving rise to death would have changed, would have been recorded?
No, I can't honestly remember that. I mean, it did go on, as I say, we had a number of deaths during the early to mid-90s, possibly towards the end of the 90s. I might well have reverted, but I think it was common policy around the UK to, as I say, protect the dignity of the patients and their relatives by not referring specifically to HIV, and I think to a lesser extent hepatitis C as well.
And without please mentioning any individual names, do you recall whether there were any inquests at which the local coroner investigated the circumstances in which patients had become infected with HIV or hepatitis?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware of that at all. I'm sure that if that had been the case, you'd have had documentation that you'd have presumably shown me.
I'm not aware of it, Dr. Wilde. I'm just asking whether you have any recollection of being asked to participate in any such inquests.
No.
Then in paragraph, in your witness statements, and it's paragraph 78, you refer to the policy in relation to the retention of medical records. You've said in the early years when you were director, the policy at the Haemophilia Centre was to retain all written medical records of patients who had been infected with transfusion-transmitted viruses indefinitely after death. And those were physical hard copy records, as I understand it, to start with.
Yes.
But you then say when the Trust went to a paperless medical record, it was agreed that those record files would be retained centrally by the Trust. But it's come to your attention that some records following the deaths of patients have been destroyed. Is that right?
Yes, I'm led to believe that, as I say, in the course of time following the introduction of the electronic patient record, I think there were major issues with storage with regards to the old records, and I think somebody must have made a decision that because the patients were no longer alive, that the notes no longer needed to be, the hard copy of notes no longer needed to be retained. I mean, those notes were certainly, as far as I'm aware, not made an electronic record.
And do you know when that change of approach occurred, with the result that there were written medical records destroyed? Were you still director at the time?
Well, yes, I think I would have been. I'm not sure that, as I say, I think it's something that would have happened without being brought to my attention. As I say, when we had hard copy, we used to keep the notes of deceased patients in filing cabinets on our old unit. I think that there was a change when we moved to our new unit. We simply couldn't accommodate them, and this would be around 2012, which I'm sure they'd have then gone to central record, and I can only assume would have then been destroyed in a time period after that, which could have well been before my retirement in 2016.
And then, still on the theme of records, the information that was sent by you as director to Oxford or to the National Haemophilia database, were patients informed that information about them was being sent to Oxford or to the database? And were they asked to consent to that?
With regard to the annual returns that we sent every year, and again, I cannot remember. I'm sure we stopped sending named patient individual data, because I think that I don't think Oxford could cope with that. So I think we sent data, aggregate data, with regard to numbers of units used by patients, but not on an individual named patient basis. As far as I'm aware, as in many other centres in the country, the patients never gave expressed consent to us sending that data. But having said that, when we, as far as the green cards, I'm sure you're aware of the green card system, we went through a process of renewing everybody's green cards during the 1990s, because obviously we had new details of certainly myself and the centre contacts. And when I saw patients issuing them with the cards, I would say that we would be formally registering them with the Oxford database and then subsequently the Manchester database. And that was solely that they'd be given a code. I'm sure they were given a kind of, I think it was a letter number code, which would then identify them centrally, so that if they had any problems at other centres and they weren't able to contact, or other centres couldn't contact ourselves directly, and this would obviously apply to all the other centres in the country, then somebody could contact the central database, initially in Oxford, then in Manchester, to get the patient details, the diagnosis and usual treatments that they have.
Thank you.
But again, they did give written informed consent for that information to be sent on them to the databases.
And then, just returning to the topic of VCJD, are you aware of other factor concentrates used in the 80s which were suspected to give rise to the possible risk of transmission of VCJD, specifically replinate and replinine? Do you recall anything about that?
I think they were on the list of products that we were informed of by BPL. Is that correct? I think you probably had that list, haven't you, of the various batches that we were informed had been contributed to by a donor who subsequently went on to variant CJD. And I think that they were within the batches. I think there was the 8Y product, and I think also the high purity, the replinate, replinine.
Okay. You're not aware of any separate exercise in relation to VCJD notification other than those that we've discussed in your evidence before the break?
Not that I'm aware of.
You referred to the stoicism of a number of your patients. Again, without please mentioning any patients by name, do you recall that there were some patients, including I think some of your patients, who became so concerned about VCJD and the risks of other virus transmissions such as parvovirus that they went on a treatment strike because of the non-availability of recombinant? Is that something you recall?
No, I don't recall any of my patients doing that, no.
And then, again, without mentioning any particular patients, please, how common, was it common for there to be misdiagnosis of patients with bleeding disorders who then received treatment that may have infected them, and then it subsequently transpired that they had not, they did not have haemophilia or whatever the specific bleeding disorder was?
I recall one case of an individual who I think was transferred over to me, who had previously been diagnosed with, I think it was a haemophilia B, and when we tested him, his factor 9 level was completely normal. And there is a condition, I'm sure you're aware, where you can have a low factor during childhood, but then when adolescence kicks in, the factor 9 level is then normalised. I'll be honest, my recollection, I cannot remember whether that case was a genuine mistaken diagnosis at the time he was a child, or whether he had one of these rare forms of factor 9 deficiency. And I honestly can't remember whether or not that patient actually had any treatment. But off the top of my head, that's the only case I can remember of a misdiagnosis.
So you don't recall any kind of wider pattern?
No.
As part of the look-back exercise in relation to the patients at the centre for the purposes of hepatitis C testing, did that involve invitations to partners or family members also to be tested for hepatitis C, as far as you can recall?
Yeah, I think when we identified individuals who had got hepatitis C infection, we did invite partners if they so wished, because we thought they could potentially be at risk, but we certainly wouldn't be testing children.
Okay. And then final topic I wanted to ask you about was about relationships with pharmaceutical companies. It's a general question rather than specifically relating to your own practice, Dr. Wilde. You've given details of your own involvement with pharmaceutical companies in your statement. But you say in your statement there was a close relationship between the UK HCDO executive and pharmaceutical companies with regard to issues arising with individual blood products. What do you mean by there being that close relationship between the UK HCDO executive and pharmaceutical companies?
Well, I think there had to be an open relationship with regard to sharing of data and really just an open frankness with regard to issues that may well have arisen with regard to individual blood products, so that the companies could then address issues in discussion with the UK HCDO.
I think
that's what
there was a point in time at which those involved with UK HCDO had to complete annual declarations of interests. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Do you recall whether there was ever any discussion amongst the UK HCDO executive or any of the working parties about whether there was a conflict of interest between clinicians receiving funding from pharmaceutical companies for research on the one hand and clinicians choosing the products for use on the other? Was that risk of conflict of interest or subconscious bias something that was explored by UK HCDO?
I'm not aware of that at all. I mean, certainly in my own practice, I never ever had any involvement in companies in that regard.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wilde. Those are the questions I have for you. Sir, do you have any questions for Dr. Wilde?
No, I don't.
Is there anything you would wish to add, Dr. Wilde?
I think simply to reiterate the fact that the whole infected blood issue has been a massive tragedy for this patient cohort. I think that, again, I'd like to say that I was proud and felt very privileged that I was appointed as a consultant in Birmingham to look after such a wonderful group of patients. I think that over many, many years, I had very good personal and professional relationships with very many of them. And again, I felt proud to be their consultant. And equally, I'd like to just say that my team during the years I was there were absolutely wonderful. And I like to think that between us, we gave the vast majority of times the very highest quality of care that they could receive.
Thank you, Dr. Wilde. Sir?
Well, it remains for me to thank you, Dr. Wilde, for being with us. It's a pity that you can't be with us in person, but we're very glad that we've been able to have you remotely. So thank you for your time, and thank you for telling us about your own experiences in Birmingham after 1992. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So that completes the evidence for today, and then tomorrow we resume with Dr. Parapia, who was the director at Bradford Haemophilia Centre, and he will be giving evidence in person here.
So 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
10 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you all.